now. Since we're reading a lot of books of the saints, we read a book on the Gospel of Ramakrishna, Swami Rama. We took a book on the autobiography of a yogi in the past. And I thought it's fitting that we take a book aptly on the very widely known Neem Karoli Baba, whose ashram, I think, if I'm not wrong, is somewhere near Nainital. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but we'll go through the book and we'll come up with the actual understanding. All right. Very excited about it. Let's start the. And by the way, my sincere hope is that this book is able to inspire all of you to reach greater spiritual heights in your own practice. That is one of my genuine hopes, and I also wish that all of you also want to get inspired. How many of you are? I'm sure most of you are Hatha practitioners, right? Sometimes it is not the that you lack power, but it's that you lack awareness. So even in pranic healing, awareness will show you if you're able to find the right kind of energy, not necessarily the power. Power is when you've identified something, then you need the power to remove, right? But if you don't have the awareness, you know. So this is a good pointer to start practicing the meditation called Arhatik Dhyan on a very regular basis. I've actually noticed, so this is a thing that I was actually trying to think for some time that somebody mentioned this, that somebody very reliable, quite reliable, somebody who sticks to Master's teachings very firmly, mentioned that Master Choa says, I think that's what was mentioned to me, that Master Choa says that even if you have a spiritual cord the size of a thumb, itni moti cord, spiritual cord, you can do miracles. And there are people who have spiritual cord fairly thick, but they're not able to do miracles, which means development is not all rounded. One of the possible components, among others, is missing or lacking awareness. So, for that, make sure that you guys practice arhatic meditations. One of them is arhatic dhyan. Very important to maintain awareness. Even to know oneself, you need to practice awareness. Let's start the session. Yeah, everybody. All right. By the way, if you guys like the flyer will actually completely black and white. But I thought, no, let's just spice it up. Then the word love came in pink. Okay. All right. Let's start. Invocation to the Supreme God, to the Great Divine Father and the Great Divine Mother. Thank you for your priceless blessings, for your divine light, divine love, divine power, divine healing, guidance, mercy, help, and protection. Thank you. To our great spiritual teacher, to all the great spiritual teachers, to all the great gods and goddesses, to all the great, great ones, we very, very humbly thank you for your great blessings. We thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Thank you to the great Neem Karoli Baba. We all very humbly invoke your blessings for your divine light, love, and power, for your guidance, for your blessings of success and prosperity also. We are very, very grateful. Very, very grateful. Thank you for blessing us with humility. Humility, humility, humility. Thank you. All right. So let's start the book, okay? This is the first page. I will show you a little bit before also. Um, The book starts with obviously the picture of the great Neem Karoli Baba. Then starts empty page. Then there is Miracle of Love over here. Also by Ramdas, there are other four books. So this is stories about Neem Karoli Baba. Basically, stories, right? By Ramdas, double S, published in New York. So first time I think it was written in 1979, the very first time. And by the way, Neem Gurule Baba is a great bhakt of Hanuman. That's probably why the copyright of stories is by the Hanuman Foundation. Text copyright is by Ramdas. Photograph copyright is by Rameshwar Das. And total copyright by Krishna Das and Hanuman Foundation. Very interesting. It supposedly is the first edition, I think, printed in 1979, really? Yeah, sounds like that. First edition. So this is the map, by the way. All of you should know. There's a map here of the Himalayas in which there are multiple temples shown. It says that temples, right? Temples, bridle path, motor road, and railroad. So all the railroads, all the motor roads, and these are the bridle paths. So Joshimath, I think I've been to. Then there's a Y junction called Badrinath and Kedarnath. Rishikesh I've stayed. Nearby something must be Dehradun also, but I don't see it over here right now. Anyway, so Ganga is right over here. Pithoragarh has a big army base. There must be another place here by the name. There's a great Sikh temple. It is called as what is the Joshimath, and then what's the name of this? Anybody remembers that great Sikh temple which is right next to Badrinath? I'm missing the name right now from my mind. Hemkund Sahib, Hemkund Sahib. Thank you so much. Hemkund Sahib, yeah. So Joshimath ke aage jaake there comes Govind Ghat, then Govind Dham, then comes your Hemkund Sahib, right? And Rane Khet is the one where Babaji's cave was there. Remember, you guys remember these places, right? Kanchi, Nainital, I think right about here is the thing, right? All right, let's go forward. So, table of contents, introduction. Let's start the book. I think the title is When the Flower Blooms. In 1967, I met my guru. That meeting changed the course of my life, for through him I came to perceive my life in spiritual terms. In him I found new depths of compassion, love, wisdom, humor, and power. And his actions stretched my understanding of the human possibility. I recognized in him an alliance of the human and the divine. After our initial meeting, by the way, it's a very long book, huh? 436 pages. But the fact is that the pages aren't that big, so we can probably do it much faster also. After our initial meeting, I remained in India, as close to him as I was allowed to be, for 5 more months before returning to America. Before leaving India, I had received his Ashirvad blessing for a book, which until that moment I had no thought of writing. Back in the West, see, he had received the Ashirvad for a book which until that moment he had no thought of writing. Back in the West, I found many kindred souls open and ready to share what I had received, and his blessing and their thirst gave rise to Be Here Now. I think his first book, by the way. In 1970, I returned to India and remained with him off and on from February 1971 until March 1972, 1 plus year. When my visa expired and I was evicted from the country, however, with him or away from him, he remained the source and impetus for my spiritual awakening. From the beginning, I had wanted to share him with others, but initially he forbade me bringing people directly to him. A relatively few, several hundred Westerners nevertheless found their way to him and were touched at the core of their beings as I had been. On September 11th, 1973, he died, or as the Indians would say, he left his body. In the succeeding years, I have found that the absence of his body has not diminished his influence upon my life. To the contrary, with each passing year, I've increasingly experienced his presence, his guidance, his love, and each time I've taken myself too seriously, his comic giggle. This suggested the possibility that others who have never met him in the body could similarly be touched by him. This suspicion has been confirmed by a surprisingly large number of people who have reported that through books, lectures, tapes, and personal contact with the devotees, they have experienced him in a way that has graced their lives. I speak of him as, in quotes, my guru, but in fact, I never think of him or our relationship in such a formal way. For me, he is very simply Maharajji, a nickname which means great king. So commonplace in India that one can often hear a tea vendor addressed thus. Those of us who were with Maharajji meet again and again, frequently in India or in the West. The conversation invariably turns to recollections of him. Story after story pours forth, and each story is punctuated with silence, laughter, or expostulations as we savor its depth and elegance. In those moments, the space becomes rich with the living spirit, and we know that he is among us. In my travels, I have now met thousands of awakening beings whose open hearted receptivity makes me want to share the intimacy with Maharaji to which stories about him give rise. And yet, thus far, only a very few stories about him, primarily concerning my personal experiences with him, have appeared in print. It was in order to rectify this situation that the present book was undertaken. Immediately after his death, I encouraged several Westerners in their plan to travel throughout India collecting stories. They were able to obtain some 400 anecdotes, but at the time they found many of the Indian devotees reticent or basically not wanting to speak about him. He had always frowned upon their talking much about him, and they were still feeling that restriction. In 1976, two of us were again in India and found, to our delight, that many of the Indian devotees, who were, of course, had known him far more extensively and over the course of many more years than we had, were now willing to freely share their treasure of stories. At that time, we collected 1,200 stories. Since then, with the help of another Westerners, we have added an additional 400 stories gathered from the East and the West, thus bringing the total number of stories, anecdotes, and quotations based on interviews with over 100 devotees to over 2,000. Of course, even 100 devotees are altogether but a fraction of the thousands who were touched by Maharajji in the course of his life. See, it's very simple English, no? Very, very simply written English. Beautiful. Each of whom holds some precious memory and piece of the puzzle. But lest we would drown in such an ocean of recollection, at a certain point I made an arbitrary decision to stop gathering and begin to organize what we already had. The devotees whose stories were included are from a wide range of social and cultural positions. Interviews were gathered from important officials in their offices and from sweepers on the streets. We taped discussions of women from the Himalayan hill villages as they squatted, warming their hands around a coal brazier in the late afternoon. We listened to reminiscences or in living rooms, streets, temple compounds while sitting around fires under the stars in cars, hot tubs, airplanes, and on long walks. Stories were offered by Hindu priests as they puffed on their chilam, the hashish pipe, chilam, by professors, police officials, farmers, industrialists, by children and their mothers, who spoke while stirring their bubbling pots over wood and charcoal fires. Always there was the same feeling of shy joy at sharing such a private, precious memory with another. These gatherings to speak about him were indescribably graceful, beautiful. Having gathered these stories, our next question was how to present this formidable body of material. For 3 years, I had been working with this problem, writing and rewriting. My initial effort was more in the way of personal chronology, but I found that such a structure did not easily include all the material, and additionally, it demanded the inclusion of much that seemed irrelevant. So I started this time incorporating my personal experiences as merely additional stories and grouping selected stories around various topical headings. The result is the present compilation. The stories, anecdotes, and quotations create a mosaic through which Maharaji can be met. To hold the components of this mosaic together, I've used the absolute minimum of structural cement, preferring to keep out my personal interpretations and perspective as much as possible. But this strategy of sharing with you the material in its purest form makes precious little compromise for your motivation, for I have excluded the usual seductive storylines that would make you want to read further. I did not want to manipulate your desire to want to read about Maharajji. Rather, I merely wanted to make whatever was available to me available to you. As you will see, Maharajji demanded that all of us make some considerable effort to have this his darshan. See, as you will see, Maharajji demanded that all of us make some considerable effort to have his darshan, the experience of his presence. By the way, this is exactly what happens in our Hatha Yoga retreat. The teacher asks us to to come and actually see us in a retreat. That is his asking, and we basically are supposed to go. Very very simple retreat, right? So basically, as you will see, Maharaji demanded that all of us make some considerable effort to have his darshan. I feel that it is in the spirit of his teachings to demand that those readers who would have his darshan through this book make a similar right or real effort in the sense spoken of by the Buddha in the Eightfold Path and by George Gurdjieff. So, if you approach in this book with a desire to meet him and have his darshan in a way that could profoundly alter your life as it has ours, then you will want to work with this book slowly and deeply. I can only assure you that, in my opinion, each story carries some teaching and is worthy of reflection. You will neither want to nor be able to read this book through from cover to cover in one or even a few sittings. Rather, like a fine brandy, these recollections must be sipped slowly and the taste and aroma allowed to permeate deeply into your mind and heart. And remember to listen to the silence to which the stories are set. For the true meeting with, with Maharaji lies between the lines and behind the words. For this effort, you will be amply rewarded through meeting a being of a spiritual stature rarely known on this earth. It is difficult to separate Maharajji and his teachings from the environment in which I knew him. His form, in its larger sense, is for me India and the beautiful Kumaon Hills and the Ganges. It is his devotees and all their tenderness and bickering. It is his temples and the photographs of him. His teachings were the love of the earth. His teachings were the love of the earth mother that I first experienced in the Indian villages, and my dysentery and visa hassles, and the sacred cows and rickshaw rides, the teeming markets and mystery jungle walks. And yet, while the drama of being with him was played out on the rich stage of India, the value of the setting seemed merely as a reservoir of experiences through which the teachings could occur. He himself did not seem particularly Indian, no more Eastern than Western. Although we met him in Hindu temples, he did not seem any more Hindu than Buddhist or Christian. He used all the stuff of our lives: clothing, food, sleep, fears, doubts, aspirations, families, marriages, sicknesses, births, and deaths to teach us about living in the spirit. By doing this, he initiated a process through which we could continue to learn from the experiences of our lives even when we were not with him. This accounts, at least in part, for the continuity in his teachings that we have all experienced since his death. I hope that through working with these stories, you can tune your perceptions in such a way as to meet and begin a dialogue with Maharajji through the vehicle of your own daily life events. Such a moment to moment dialogue carried on in one's heart is a remarkable form of alchemy for transforming matter into spirit through love. I have been hanging out with Maharajji in just this way, and I can't begin to tell you. Soquel, California, March 1979, Ramdas. Acknowledgements. The material in this volume is culled from over 2,000 stories. By the way, it takes a very, very long time to get 2,000 stories. It's a lot of effort, by the way, behind this book. The material in this volume is culled from over 2,000 stories about Maharajji gathered during 5 years from more than 100 devotees. To these devotees who shared their treasured memories, I wish to express my deep love and appreciation. Some of them felt that no book could or should be written about a being with qualities as vast, formless, and subtle as Maharajji's, and yet they contributed their stories nevertheless. I honor them for this kindness, and I hope that in my zeal to share experiences of Maharajji with others who were not fortunate enough to have met him, I have not misused their trust. Some devotees tell me that stories told by other devotees are not factually accurate. I have no way of ascertaining the authenticity of any single story. All I can report is that those of us who gathered the stories were impressed by the credibility of those who told the stories. Though the responsibility for this manuscript lies solely with me, I am delighted to acknowledge that a lot of loving help from my friends. Anjani, foremost among these, donated over 4 months of full time effort at a point where my confidence in this project was seriously flagging. Her love for Maharajji touched this manuscript in so many ways. K.K. Shah sent me thick letters from India with page by page and times, line by line suggestions for improving the manuscript and avoiding embarrassing cultural errors. His devotion and love efforts have fed me greatly. Chaitanya helped gather stories in 1973 and again with me during an eventful tour of India in 1976. 1973, I think, is when he passed away, the great teacher. And then I think, yeah. He critiqued an earlier form of the manuscript and kindly allowed me to include his poem, Subtle is the Path of Love. Saraswati, Rosalie Ransom. I think these are the Indian names. Ramdas, by the way, is also an Indian name. The actual name, I'll tell you, is something else. Um, Ramdas is his actual name is Richard Alpert. Richard Alpert. Richard Alpert. Yeah. So he called himself Ramdas afterwards. So yeah, Richard Alpert. Yeah. So like Rosalie Ransom was now Saraswati. Toured India and the US with tape recorder in hand to enrich our story library immeasurably. Krishna Das, Roy Bonney, Rameshwar Das, and Pyari Lal Shah agreed to share riches from their treasury of photographs. Lillian, Sandy, and Jyoti so lovingly typed manuscript. Ramdev, Subramanyam, and Girija, Krishna, Krishna in Meera, and Soma Krishna provided helpful critiques at early stages of the work. Bill Whitehead edited this book with a sensitivity both to the devotee's intimate love of Maharaj Ji and the reader's newness to him. He remained patient over 3 years with what seemed to me like changes required from on high, but must have seemed like the machinations of just another neurotic author to him. I anticipate that many of Maharajji's devotees may not find in their book the Maharajji that they know in their hearts. I can only beg their forbearance, for this book is for those who have never met Maharajji, and uh, for those who have, no book is necessary. At moments, the audacity of this undertaking almost overwhelmed me. Knowing the way Maharajji works, however, I proceeded with the faith that there is no way this book could manifest without his blessing. The symbol Ram, you see, Ram, which appears throughout the book, is taken from Maharajji's handwritten diary. Oh, beautiful. A moment with the beloved, and the river changes its course. Wow. A moment with the beloved, and the river changes its course. So वो था कि the flower when the flower blooms, the bees come. This is the completion of it. We came to Maharajji's feet, impelled by our yearning for the living spirit. Sorry, we came to Maharajji's feet, impelled by our yearning for the living spirit and drawn by his light. We came from Europe and Great Britain and United States and Canada, Australia and South America. As Herman Hesse has said of the fellow travelers in his journey to the East, each had his or her own special reason for making the journey, but all also shared a common goal. We came with our varying hues of cynicism and faith, open or close heartedness, sensuality or asceticism, intellectual arrogance or humility. To each, Maharaji responded uniquely. Now, fiercely, Kala Mandir, Nainital, UP, India. Okay, Kala Mandir, no idea. Uski, to each Maharaji responded uniquely, now fiercely, now tenderly, now through ignoring us or sending us away, now through making much over us, now through reading the mind and heart, now through playing dumb. He did what was necessary to quiet the mind and open the heart, so that the thirst that had drawn us all to him could be slaked. By the way, it says that when the flower blooms, the bees come uninvited. Ramakrishna. I was traveling with a young Western fellow in India. We had come to the mountains in a Land Rover I'd borrowed from a friend. In order to find this fellow's guru to get some help with his visa problem. I was in a bad mood, having smoked too much hashish, been in India too long, and not particularly wanting to visit a guru anyways. And the following is adapted from the book Be Here and Now. We stopped at this temple and he asked where the guru was. The Indians who had gathered around the car pointed to a nearby hill. In a moment, he was out of the car and running up the hill. They were following him and appeared delighted to be able to see the guru. I got out of the car. Now I was additionally upset because everybody was ignoring me. I ran after them, barefoot, up this rocky path, stumbling all the way. I didn't want to see the guru anyway. And what the hell was this all about? Around a bend of path, I came to a field overlooking the valley. And in the field, under a tree, sat a man in his 60s or 70s with a blanket around him. Surrounding him were 8 or 9 Indians. I was aware of the beautiful tableau, the group, the clouds, the green valley, the visual purity of the foothills of Himalayas. My traveling companion ran to this man and threw himself on the ground, doing Danda Pranam, which means full length prostration. He was crying at the man. He was crying, and the man was patting him on the head. I was more and more confused. I stood to the side thinking, I'm not going to touch his feet. I don't have to. I'm not required to do that. Every now and then, this man looked up at me and twinkled a little. His glances just made me more uncomfortable. Then he looked at me and started speaking in Hindi, of which I understood very little. Another man, however, was translating. I heard him ask my friend, You have a picture of Maharajji? My friend nodded yes. Give it to him, said the man in the blanket, pointing at me. That's very nice, I thought, giving me a picture of himself, and I smiled and nodded appreciatively. But I was still not going to touch his feet. Then he said, You came in a big car? Yes, I hadn't wanted to borrow the car in the first place, not wanting the responsibility. So the car was a source of irritation for me. He looked at me smiling and he said, You will give it to me? I started to say, What? But my friend looked up from the ground where he was still lying and said, Maharaji, if you wanted, you can have it. It's yours. I said, No, now wait a minute. You can't give away David's car like that. The old man was laughing. In fact, everyone was laughing except me. Then he said, You made much money in America? I reviewed all my years as a professor and smuggler and very proudly said, Yes. How much did you make? Well, I said at one time, and I sort of upped the figure a bit further to inflate my ego, $25,000. The group converted that into rupees, and everybody was awed by this figure. All of this was, of course, bragging on my part. I had never made $25,000, and he laughed again and said, "You'll buy a car like that for me?" I remember what went through my mind at that moment. Although I had come from a family of Jewish fundraisers, I had never seen such hustling as this. He doesn't even know my name and he already wants a $7,000 vehicle, I thought. Well, maybe, I said. The whole thing was by now upsetting me very much. And he said, take them away and give them food. And so we were given magnificent food and then we were told to rest. Sometime later, we were back with Maharaj Ji and he said to me, come here, sit. So I sat down facing him and he looked at me and said, you were out under the stars last night. This, of course, was English translation of what he said. Mm-hmm. You were thinking about your mother. Yes. The previous night, a few hundred miles away, I had gone outside during the night to go to the bathroom. The stars had been very bright, and I had remained outside, feeling very close to the cosmos. At that time, I had suddenly experienced the presence of my mother, who had died 9 months previously of a spleen condition. It was a very powerful moment, and I had told no one about it. She died last year. Mm-hmm. She got very big in the stomach before she died. Yes. He leaned back and closed his eyes and said in English, spleen. She died of spleen. Wow. What happened to me at that moment, I can't really put into words. He looked at me in a certain way, and two things happened. They do not seem like cause and effect, but rather appear to be simultaneous. My mind began to race faster and faster to try to get leverage, to get a hold on what he had just done. I went through every super CIA paranoia I had ever had. Who is he? Who does he represent? Where's the button he pushes to make the file appear? Why have they brought me here? None of it would gel. It was just too impossible that this could have happened in this way. My traveling companion didn't know about any of the things Maharajji was saying, and I was a tourist in a car. The whole thing was just inexplicable. My mind went faster and faster until when I had two models for psychic experiences. Until then, I had two models for psychic experiences. One was, well, it happened to somebody else, and it's very interesting, and we certainly must keep an open mind about these things. That was my social science approach. The other one was, well, I'm high on LSD. Who knows how it really is? After all, I had experiences under the influence of chemicals in which I had created the whole environment. But neither of these categories applied to this situation. As my mind went faster, I felt like a computer that had been fed an insoluble problem. The bell rings and the red light goes on and the machine stops. My mind just gave up. It burned out its circuitry, its zeal to have an explanation. I love this part. You see, my mind burned out its circuitry, its zeal to have an explanation. It burnt it out. Matlab, after that time, no explanation was needed. It didn't matter after a while. This is amazing. After a while, no explanation was needed. I needed something. I'm sorry, just 1 second. See, I needed something to get closure at the rational level, and there wasn't anything. At the same moment, I felt this extremely violent pain in my chest and a tremendous wrenching feeling, and I started to cry. I cried and cried, but I was neither happy nor sad. It was a kind of crying I had not experienced before. The only thing I could say about it was it felt as if I had finished something. The journey was over, I had come home. Ramdas. RD denotes concerning Ramdas, story concerning Ramdas. In the words of Dada, we all think we are chasing the Guru, but really you see he's chasing us. All I knew about the hardships of India made me sure I didn't want to go there. Yet in October of 1971, I found myself at George F. Kennedy Airport, John F. Kennedy Airport, JFK Airport, with two friends waiting to board a plane for Bombay. A large crowd of our New York spiritual group had come to see us off, or as I suspected, to make sure we actually got on the plane. We were all three in varying states of panic, wondering what we were doing. Both the panic and the confusion were to intensify a hundredfold when we actually arrived in India. We three, like nearly all the group of Westerners, were eventually joined around Maharajji. First heard of him through Ramdas. By the way, I think the story is coming from somebody else. Through Ramdas. Yet, though my life totally changed after the night I first heard Ramdas lecture, I did not feel drawn to go to India. Partially, the mystique of what is going to India represented in those days made it seem presumptuous for me to even consider the trip. Nor was it clear to me that the power of the awakening I had experienced was in fact a connection with Maharajji, that he could possibly be my guru. We had all heard how difficult it was to him to find him. We had all heard how difficult it was to find him. And what if he sent me away as he had others? Now, 3 years later, I was going to India, but I still hadn't that temerity to chance rejection. I was going to see some South Indian saints and perhaps later visit up north. And by the way, the great teacher was in north, right? If there seemed any hope of being received. Coming off the plane in Bombay, we were met by an airline representative in India, a feat in itself, who advised us that we had reservations on an afternoon flight to New Delhi and that tickets were waiting for us at the counter. This was a stunner, but after a 26 or 28-hour flight, we were too dazed to feel more than mild wonder. After all, we were in India, anything could happen here. This mystery of tickets and reservations to Delhi was never solved in any reasonable way. In Delhi, we thought of going to American Express office to ask for messages as we had planned to do in Bombay. After all, since we were here, there must be messages. There was, in quotes, go to Jaipuriya Bhavan in Vrindavan. Maharajji expected soon. More like a telegram, by the way. It was signed Balaram Das. We didn't know who that was. We learned that Vrindavan was not too far from Delhi and that we could get there by an afternoon train. Somehow we never thought of pausing in the relative westernness of Delhi. The message said, go and go we did. We thereby learned the first great lesson of India never travel by third class unreserved coach. It was the equivalent of a 3 hour ride on a New York City subway at rush hour, with the addition of sunshine, dust, and engine smoke pouring in the open windows. Eventually, we battled our way off the train at Mathura and in the glowing dusk of Indian plain, whose beauty we could not then appreciate. We found a bus to take us to a nearby Vrindavan. There we put down in the large bazaar of what to all appearances was a 13th century village of winding alleys full of people. 13th century village. Mathura. It's funny. Let's again read this. Eventually, we battled our way off the station at Mathura, and in the glowing dusk of Indian plain, whose beauty we could not then appreciate, we found us. We found a bus to take us to nearby Vrindavan. There we were put down in the large bazaar of what to all appearances was a 13th century village of winding alleys full of people, rickshaw, dogs, pigs, and cows. By now it was dark, and most of the illumination came from the lanterns in the shops lining the streets. We asked for directions to Jaipuriya Bhavan in our non existent Hindi and were directed first up one alley and then down another. It grew later, and the shops were beginning to close. Our panic grew with our exhausting exhaustion and hunger. For even if we came upon the hostel, we would not recognize it, for every sign was in Hindi. We began to envision ourselves huddling for the night among the cows in some doorway. We began to envision ourselves huddling for the night among the cows in some doorway. It's really funny. Then suddenly approached us appeared then suddenly approaching us appeared a Westerner, someone whom I had met the year before in California. In a hysterical relief, I threw my arms around him, but he, an old timer in India, was totally calm in the face of her emotion. Oh yes, Jaipuriya Bhavan was just there, around the next bend. During the next few days, the small Western satsang, community of spiritual seekers, began gathering at Jaipuriya Bhavan, awaiting Maharajji's arrival at his Vrindavan ashram monastery. Many of them we knew from America, including the mysterious Balaram Das, whom we'd known as Peter. We heard their stories of Maharajji with relief and anticipation. He didn't sound so fierce and terrifying after all. Then word came that he was here. The next morning we could go to have his darshan. I arrived at the ashram a little late with Radha, nervously clutching my borrowed sari. Sorry, borrowed sari? I arrived at the ashram a little late with Radha. I didn't understand this actually. With Radha. Radha is probably a person nervously clutching my borrowed sari and offering of flower and fruits. We circumambulated the temple and pranamed, bowed to Hanuman. Oh, it could be by a woman. Oh, that's true. That's thank you. This is a good example. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. This is in my mind was all a man all the time. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Probably by a woman. Yeah. Because a woman would tie a sari, no, of course, yeah. So it says ki I arrived at the ashram a little late with Radha, nervously clutching my borrowed sari and the offering of flowers and fruit. We circumambulated the temple and pranamed or bowed to Hanumanji, and then approached the gate in the wall between the temple and the garden and the ashram. How well I remember that green wooden door. When we knocked, the old chowkidar gatekeeper opened it as a crack. It opened it a crack and peered out at us. Then, as each time afterward, for as long as I was in India, I wondered as if he would let us in. But he stepped back, pulling the door open for us. I looked through, down the vistas of the long veranda, along the front of the ashram building. At the far end, Maharajji was sitting alone on his wooden bed. When I saw his great form, which means the big body, right? Like the great form, my heart jumped so that I staggered against the gate. That first sight of him is still piercingly clear in my memory. Radha had already rushed through, and I ran after her, losing my sandals along the way. It was all so simple and familiar, bowing at his feet, giving the fruit and the flowers, which he immediately threw back in my lap, weeping and laughing. Maharaji was bouncing, smiling, and crowing in English, sorry, was bouncing, smiling, and crowing in English. Mother from America. During that first darshan, though Maharaji spoke mainly in Hindi, I understood everything without the interpreter who stood nearby, and I recognized the love that had poured through Ramdas, that had irresistibly drawn me to India. Here was the source, Ram. Everybody else was all everybody else was all excited, but I was pretty skeptical about the whole thing. Still, I was the first one off the bus and found myself running immediately into the temple, even though I'd never been there. I somehow knew all the turns to make in order to get to where the Maharaji was. As I was around the corner, he started bouncing up and down and exclaiming all these things in Hindi that totally confused me. I came to him and bowed down at his feet. He began to hit me really very hard. I had both a sense of great confusion and a feeling of most incredible at oneness that I have ever felt in my life. He was so totally different from what I had expected, yet so familiar at the same time. At that moment, I felt all the suffering, all the pain from the last several years dissolve completely. And through the pain was to come back again in the future. The love I felt at that moment made it all a lot less painful later. See, and though the pain was to come back again in the future, the love I felt at that moment made it all a lot less painful later. Wow. I had heard of Maharajji while wandering in India, and I finally found him in Allahabad. My first meeting was in the early morning. Maharajji was in a room on the bed with a Ma, Indian women devotee, sitting before him on the floor. There was fruit on the bed. Then out from under the big blanket came this hand. He took some big apples and kept bouncing them off the Ma's chest. But she was totally absorbed in meditation. Then suddenly Maharaji looked directly at me. He was like a tree, so grounded, so organic. He flipped me a banana and it landed right in my hand. I wondered what I should do with a banana, a sacred object. I figured it would be best to eat it. We can read this also, yeah. I'd come to India from United States as a devotee in a very intense religious sect. The Guru was the Guru, the final and the great savior. After only 2 weeks in his presence, I was clearly disillusioned about him and began to wander about India on my own, still hoping to find the one true and pure Guru somewhere. Several times in my wanderings, someone would tell me of Maharajji and that he was nearby. But I would not go, as I felt no particular pull. Finally, I was down near Bombay, still seeking the true Guru, when an old friend showed up. He looked so clear, and light that before we even spoke, I determined to go wherever it was he had just come from. He had just left Maharajji in Vrindavan. I packed my bags and was gone that afternoon. 24 hours later, I was before Maharajji. There were a number of Westerners there. Maharajji did not speak to me, but he kept looking very intently at my heart chakra, the psychic energy center in the heart chakra of the body. And what I kept hearing as a voice within me was that my search was over. I had come home. I was sitting for several months in Buddhist meditation in Bodh Gaya. About two-thirds of the way through the second month, this funny looking little man started to appear in the upper right corner of my awareness. Every so often he'd smile. I wondered who he was and just watched him come and go. Later, I began to suspect it was Maharajji, whom I'd heard about the year before. At the end of the retreat, I opened a copy of the 100,000 Songs of Milarepa, and a picture of Maharajji fell out. When we finally got to Vrindavan, where he was supposed to be, we found the gates of the temple locked. Feeling very sad that I had come all this way only to find the gates locked, I went across the street and sat on the culvert. All of a sudden, I felt as if Maharaji had come leaping over the wall, for I was completely surrounded and filled with the greatest love I had ever experienced. I burst into tears. People passing by saw this crazy, long haired Westerner sobbing his guts out. They just looked at me and smiled and continued on. I did not know what was going on, but I had the sense of being home. There was absolutely no question that I was exactly where I wanted to be. A month before, I could not have imagined such an experience, but here I was, so relieved, so happy. My heart seemed to have burst open. Shortly afterward, we were allowed into the temple. Maharaji asked me all the usual questions like who I was and where I was from and what I did. Then suddenly I found myself bowing with my head at his feet and feeling totally alright about it. And he was patting me on my head, saying something like, "Welcome, glad to see you made it. Welcome aboard." All I wanted to do was to hang onto his feet, and I didn't care at all that this wasn't in any way consistent with my self image. From this, we'll start later. Sorry, I was getting mildly emotional reading this. This is a remarkable story. Different people, not the same person. One was Ramdas, second was a woman, third was somebody else, fourth was this guy. Different experience. Let's do a closing invocation. Special thanks to the great teacher. Say to the Supreme God, to the great Divine Father and the great Divine Mother. Thank you for your great blessings. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. To our great spiritual teacher, to all the great spiritual teachers, to all the great gods and goddesses, to all the great ones, we extremely humbly thank you for your great blessing. We thank you so much. To the great teacher Neem Karoli Baba, we very sincerely thank you for all the great blessings, for all your priceless blessings in the form of stories, teachings, and energy. We thank you, we thank you, we thank you. All right. See you next Saturday. Take care. God bless you. Bye bye. See you.